Welcome to The F Word, a podcast series that examines, excavates, unpicks and reframes forgiveness through the lives of others. I'm Marina Cantacuzino, a journalist from London, founder of the Forgiveness Project charity, and I've built my career investigating how those who face the most complex and devastating things in life find a way through. I'll be talking fortnightly to a guest who's experienced something very difficult or traumatic in their life, but who rather than respond with hate or bitterness has embraced, or at the very least considered, forgiveness as a response to pain. My guest today is Kia Scherr, co-founder of One Life Alliance, a charity she set up in response to the 2008 Mumbai terrorist attacks that claimed 164 lives, including those of her husband Alan and their 13-year-old daughter Naomi. Naomi and Alan were in Mumbai, staying at the famous Oberoi Hotel on that fateful night, taking part in an international meditation retreat with the Synchronicity Foundation, which is a spiritual community based in Virginia, USA, which the family had been a part of for several years. So welcome, Kia. Welcome to London.
Thank you.
It's lovely to see you again. I wanted to start off actually by talking about the organisation you set up, which was, I suspect, a dynamic and creative response to pain, part of the healing process.
Yes.
And we talk a lot at the Forgiveness Project about meaning making.
Yes.
That is the ability to use adversity for a greater good. So I was wondering, at what point did you pick yourself up off the floor and think about doing something which was focused on the dignity of life?
It was within the first few months, and in response to emails our group from the Synchronicity Foundation had received from all over the world, from people of all religions. The love and compassion that came forth, which is the opposite of terrorism. And we wanted to keep that focus and conversation going about the oneness and sacredness of life, and to create a structure for that. And then I was asked to be president of the organization and to be the spokesperson for it.
Were you able to do that right away, or did you sit back and let others help and support you to start with?
It was, to some extent, yes, because we didn't launch until the first anniversary. So I had a year to build up to that. So I wasn't speaking in public about it until that time.
Synchronicity Foundation, perhaps just explain what it is and how you got involved and for how long.
Yeah, it's a meditation retreat center teaching modern spirituality using high-tech meditative experience and holistic lifestyle. It's a non-religious organization. So it's using technology to create the experience of the mantras and chanting from the East so that people could have a modern way of meditating and make it easy for them. So, and we were there as resident staff members giving retreats, and people from all over the world would come to our retreats several times a year.
And Naomi grew up there?
Naomi grew up there. She was homeschooled for most of that time, except for a couple of years. And we had left the rat race of Washington, D.C. to simplify our lives. That was our choice, to live in an environment like that. It was in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. So we got to meet people from Australia and Canada and Europe and other places who came to the retreats.
And in 2008,
yes,
Alan was organising this retreat.
That's
Is that
right.
In India.
Yes.
Staying partly in Mumbai.
That's right. He had to visit Mumbai June of that year to look at all possible locations, so that we could have a group of 20 or so people who would be comfortable there, and then they could do their day trips and have their meditation programs for the public in the evenings. So Alan went in June to locate the best possible place for these people to gather in Mumbai. And somebody said, just check out the Oberoi. You might like that. So that happened. And then 1 month later, David Headley, who is a Pakistani American, and he was working for the terrorist group, the LET, Lashkar-e-Taiba group, and he was assigned to find locations for this terrorist attack. He spent a few months there, and they picked out about five locations, and was waiting to go to a movie at the Inox Theater in Mumbai, which I've since been to many times. And while he was waiting for the movie, wandered into the Oberoi lobby and said, add it to the list. And it was added to the list at the last minute.
And Naomi and Alan went. You didn't?
Correct. Yeah. I was in Florida, and I was going to visit my sons and parents, and my whole family was there meeting for Thanksgiving. And they were going to have their father-daughter trip, and it was an educational experience for her, with a group of 25 people that were all people who had attended our retreats from Australia, Canada, and the United States. And they had been in Mumbai 10 days at that point, so they were in the last week of their trip when the attacks took place.
I remember very clearly watching it sort of play out live on television. It was truly terrifying. And
yeah.
I can't begin to imagine how you must have felt, because you probably at some point also turned on the television and saw what was happening.
That's right. We got a call from the managing director of Synchronicity just saying, turn on the news. I was getting ready to have tea with my mother and watch Oprah on TV. She said, turn on CNN. This is happening. And we couldn't believe it. And there it was, in shock, total shock and disbelief. No, this can't really be happening. No, maybe it's not the Oberoi. They must be mistaken. Those are the thoughts we go through our mind. They must have run out of the hotel as soon as they heard something. They're not there. We're going to find out that they're outside somewhere waiting. Or they're hiding in their rooms. They're fine. Doors are locked. They'll be fine. You know, you go through all those kinds of scenarios. Thanksgiving came and went. And then we had gotten a call saying that everybody in the group had been accounted for except for Alan and Naomi. We were told that they were last seen in the restaurant, hiding under a table. And so we thought maybe they had survived. And that's what we were hoping and praying for. And then because they were missing, my son posted their photos on iReport on CNN. And then that got picked up and it was on the news. And it was because that picture of them wearing their Indian garb, father and daughter holding hands, that went around. And that's what generated all of these email responses and prayers from all these different people.
I see. So the attack went on for 2 days?
It went on for about 2.5 days. It was Wednesday evening on the 26th, India time, around between 9:30 and 10 at night is when it all started. And then it was Friday morning that I got the call from the U.S. consulate in Mumbai confirming that they had both been killed in the restaurant.
The only two of the group?
The only two of the group that were killed. They were dining with 4 other people who were wounded and managed to crawl out with the help of the kitchen staff and get into taxis and get to the hospital.
At this point, we started talking about grief. The kind of acute grief caused by an inconceivable tragedy. The kind of grief that Stephen Levine in his book Unattended Sorrow says slams shut the heart. Previously, when I talked to Kia about grief and about her story, she told me that after the attack she remained numb for a long, long time. And she said this was necessary. She said, if I'd been able to feel right away, it would have shattered me. And she also said that it wasn't until some years after the attack that she was able to feel the deepest part of her tears. Just talking about grief for a minute, did you have any of the freezing self-protection? Because there's a real sense that if you feel the pain you can, and go into the grief, lean into it, then you can start to heal. But also, not to really go there is a sort of form of self-protection for a while. Was there that?
Absolutely. And it wasn't, I wasn't consciously trying to shield myself or self-protect, but I think it happened on its own, gradually. So I didn't get in because I think it might have destroyed me in some ways.
Shattered you, yes.
Shattered me. So it was gradual, so that each time I went back to Mumbai, and of course, I'm spending a lot of time alone, a lot of time in solitude. Sure, you get invited to speak, and it's wonderful, and it's inspiring and heartwarming. You speak, but you go back and you're alone. You wake up alone. It's the weekend. You're alone, and that was an amazing opportunity to embrace that and get to know myself, because especially a woman, wife, mother, my life was focused on those relationships.
Did you have a sense people were looking at you and saying, that's the woman who lost her daughter and her husband?
Yeah, and then there's always that, and so people don't know what to say to you.
Yes.
And so they avoid you. That's normal, totally normal. And I have compassion for that, and I understand it. But yes, that happens. So you find yourself in a different kind of a category altogether, and you probably know from talking to all of the people from Forgiveness Project and their stories, it's just different after that, the way you relate to other people in the world and the way they relate to you. And it's getting to know and accept and work with that somehow.
One might presume that someone with a very strong spiritual call, who's done a lot of work on inner and outer body mind,
right,
might have more resilience or might have more tools or heart capacity to deal with capsizing grief. Is that true?
Yes, I think it's true, but then that became my spiritual practice because there's so much more depth. See, a lot of times, if you spend a lot of time meditating, you begin to feel connected to life in a more universal way. But this is a very individual experience, a human experience. And it took more time, especially a lot of time alone, especially after I went to Mumbai, for me to allow those feelings that maybe before I would have thought that was not spiritual.
Rage?
Yes, that came way later. To embrace whatever is coming up, whether it's rage, moral outrage, or the deepest grief, hurt, despair, wanting to die, not even wanting to live. To consciously embrace that that's love, because that's where we meet life right there. That's relationship, and that's love. And to me, that's the deepest spiritual experience you can have. Most people run away from it. Yeah.
You talked about rage and anger. Where were they directed? At the perpetrators?
The actual terrorists who pulled the trigger, I felt no, because they were controlled by others. But see, that's a very complicated process, involved a lot of different players. And so it wasn't any particular person in general. It's just the way that it was. The relationship between India and Pakistan, the fact that the United States was somehow involved with providing the weapons, maybe not directly, but yet that is where they came from. The money was spent. So dealing with that was shocking. I was in Mumbai when that news came out, and I got calls from the media saying, "What do you think about this? What are your feelings about this?" And I thought, oh my God, I don't know. What do you do with that? So you have to accept it and say, how can we do better then? Okay, that's not my job, is to deal on that level, but what can I do? Can we prevent this somehow? Create other ways of governing and leading and policing and educating and doing business. What are other ways, if we include respect for life, which is love and compassion? So respect for life comes in as the highest priority, value for life, so that we say, well, we have complete disagreement about who owns this land or whatever it is, or about these religious beliefs, but we are not going to allow one single human being to be killed because of it. To me, that's the bottom line. And we're not there yet to have that value, but that's what I would like to continue to work towards.
So it sounds to me as if the spiritual practice that you had developed over the years really supported you in being able to go through that whole, I suppose you could call it a process that came very naturally.
Absolutely.
But not to fight it.
That's right.
And accept it.
To bring both of them together for the first time, because there was my inner world, which is a world of peace and sometimes silence. After a while, really reaching that place of silence and just emptiness, just that pure being.
Did you think ever about why you were alive, in the sense that you could have been with them? You could have gone on that, imagine, on that trip.
Well, yes, Naomi was sponsored. We could have said, can Kia come along too, so we can all be together? And for some reason, I just thought, no, let this be their trip. I'll go another time. The next time I'll go. So yes, of course, because I wasn't there, I can't just live a regular life. I didn't go back to my office at Synchronicity. I didn't go back to my other role I was playing there. I said to them right away, I can't, that's it. I can't go back. They said, you don't have to. That's it. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And that's how One Life Alliance was born out of that. And that became the focus. But I don't think I was very good at organizing anything. But I was there, and I don't know, somehow met a lot of people, connected with people, went to Mumbai, invited them to join with us, got the support of Mr. Oberoi, who provided accommodations for me for off and on for 6 years. I was probably there over 1,000 nights and days.
And you would have probably found some kind of meaning in the fact that you had survived.
That's
you had to do something with your life.
That's exactly right. There had to be a purpose, because nothing else mattered. Nothing else had any meaning. And so I had no energy for it.
So going back to there was one surviving gunman. Is that right?
That's right. Mr Kasab was the lone surviving terrorist who they captured with the heroism of a constable who jumped on him and was killed in the process.
Yes. Did you ever have a sense that you wanted to confront the gunman, talk to him, ask him questions, or do harm to him, or what were your feelings?
The question was asked to me in interviews, if you could sit in front of that terrorist, what would you say to him? And at the time I thought, wow. I said, I'm not sure I would have the words. I'd probably cry and look at him and I wouldn't know what words to use or what questions to ask. I would be overwhelmed. But then a year later, I woke up and I thought, I think I'd have a lot to say to the terrorist. I wonder if he realizes that the sacred life that exists in each of us is within him as well. And he lost his connection to it. Does he know that? Does he know we got these emails from all over the world from fellow Muslims who said this to us? I wanted him to know that. Does he know that because of those actions, we're joining together to do something else? And that my response was forgiveness as a way, as a bridge. I wrote the letter to the terrorist because of that. I did write a letter, and at the time, I just held on to it. And at some point when I was in Mumbai, I was going to find a way to meet him with a translator and all. It was I realized that was not going to happen for various reasons. So the letter I did post in various places, so it was out there. And then a short film was made where I'm reading it out, and it's out there. So it's really a letter to all terrorists.
Do you remember the gist of it at all? Or any line in it that you could
share?
I
remember that I said, "Dear Mr. Kasab, you may wonder why I'm using the word dear in front of your name, and by the end of this letter you will understand that." Mm. And I said that my husband and daughter were brutally killed by your comrades in this attack. And so I stated, this is what happened. And then I talked about that I did hear the words of Christ that forgive them, they know not what they do. And I chose that path because we are all connected underneath all of that. He didn't learn that from his training camp. And it was do you realize about the sacredness of life that exists within each of us? Do you realize that? And so that's what I am here to now devote the rest of my life to, that conversation and education. So
what happened to him?
He was executed 4 years later in Pune. He was in Mumbai, jailed in Mumbai, but then in the middle of the night put in a car and brought to Pune, and he was executed by hanging. And it was all done in secret, and I woke up to the headlines, "A puppet's life ends on a string," was the Times of India headlines. I cried because I really believed that, I know this might be very naive of me, but I believed that somebody like that could play a very powerful role if he got connected to himself. He should certainly never regain his freedom, but within incarceration, maybe he could help to educate other prisoners so the ones who would get out he could play a role about the consequences of those actions. He saw all of his comrades mutilated, shot, killed. They took him to the morgue, so he saw the consequences of that.
Yeah. I mean, we work with ex-offenders in prisons, and there's a lovely phrase which says, the poison and the antidote are brewed in the same vat.
Yes.
And I think that is so true. There's nothing more effective
That's
and
right.
poignant and moving, really, than seeing someone who's moved from there to here, as it were, and is wanting to help others.
I think they would be the most powerful teachers of all.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how you get to them first. For instance, an attack on London Bridge, and the terrorist was somebody who was just released, apparently. Well, what if there had been a former terrorist in that prison, and they had a program? That's how you prevent it.
Yeah. I totally believe that. You mentioned forgiveness in the sense of quoting Christ's words. How do you articulate it? How does it feel for you? What does it mean for you?
I like to focus on the word forgive, that it's about love. And love listens. Love is willing to understand. Love is willing to accept. And forgiveness is a bridge that connects us to love. Because when we're unforgiving, a door in our heart closes. Something shuts down inside of us. Justifiably, understandably. It's not wrong at all. But how do we want to live? Do we want to keep those doors shut? Who doesn't get to experience love when we close it off? We are the ones that have to bear that. So if we allow love to continue to extend and flow, maybe some good can be done with that. That, to me, is what forgiveness is all about.
Have you received sort of negative comments about it? People who think, how can she?
Yes.
How dare she even?
Yes.
Even though it's your life and it's your choice.
Yes, actually. And I think the first anniversary, I was just really sharing an experience that was true, and I was not coming from a religious point of view. And what I learned was that love your neighbor as yourself, and forgiveness is all a part of that. And so that I'm not surprised that those words came to me. But yes, there were some in the media. People would say that. How could you? It was considered a radical response, and news. Like, why is that news? Why is that news? But yet it was news then, and so, okay, but let's use that as a chance to talk about it. That's why I love the Forgiveness Project, because you share these stories and it gives us all a chance to discuss it and whatever our feelings are around it. Every year I get emails from people from India who I've never met, who contact me through Facebook or wherever. They think it's something to be admired. I don't particularly feel that, but they say, I could never forgive. And I think because there's a misunderstanding about what forgiveness is, that it's this lofty thing and involves judgment or something in it. And that's not my understanding.
What do you say then when someone has had comparatively, it's hard to measure these things, but let's say minor hurts? What do you say to those people? Because they do say to you, I imagine, as you said, I could never forgive that.
Well, I think, first of all, to have compassion for their experience and to understand why they would feel so hurt that they want to push away. I understand that. It's not about forgiving an act or saying that somehow it was okay or that there should be no consequences for that or no accountability. Then certainly all that should happen, like in restorative justice programs. And I believe forgiveness is an act of self-love.
I also, from my experience of talking to people, it really opens the heart.
Yes.
And I think the thing that happens when you're so focused on anger, hate, and resentment is that it keeps you locked and trapped and reduced somehow, and certainly closes the heart. Forgiveness is expressed in so many ways, but I think that's the one thing that anyone would agree with. And when they're able to have a forgiving attitude, whatever that is, that their heart opens. They are able to reach out to others in a way that they couldn't do before.
That's right.
And a freeing up of everything, isn't it? And how you get there sometimes is mysterious.
And it's unique. And there's no one way.
No one way.
And it's not a mental thing at all. You might have to start somewhere. I think listening to these stories is inspiring and inspires people. That's a way. But yet I think people have to find their own way. But it starts with willingness. Am I willing to even consider it? Well, that's a start right there. And then see where that leads you. There's no one way. See what your way is. Yes. And then share your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Marion Partington, who's another of our storytellers, talks about lining herself up for forgiveness. She didn't know what it was, but she knew she wanted to explore it and find it. But all she could do initially was just to line herself up for it.
Right.
And then things unfold, don't they? You open up the possibility.
That's right. One final thing is that I think forgiveness is an act of love, an act of self-love, but the outcome of forgiveness is peace. And it's so that we can live in peace. The person who forgives is enabling themselves to live in peace.
But it's not just about the self, because then that also is about creating peaceful communities.
I agree. And it enables you then to give forth and communicate and share and bring some good into the world to counterbalance whatever was unforgivable.
And to build better relationships and
That's
mend
right.
broken hearts.
That's right.
I mean, it can all sound, I'm sure to some people, quite airy-fairy and wishful thinking.
Right.
But nevertheless, what's the alternative?
Exactly.
I mean, even if it's not going to achieve what you believe and want it to achieve, I'd rather live like that, striving to open my heart.
That's right.
Than to become reduced by hatred.
We can increase the love in this world, and then over time, if we can keep other people from getting hurt or killed.
Well, I do think you are amazing, Kia. I know you don't particularly like people saying that, but you've created such a life of value after such an appalling, sad tragedy that happened to you.
I feel there's so much more that can be done, and I'm just getting started. Now that I've had a decade of healing and learning, exploring and understanding, now I'm ready to give forth even more, start another chapter. So
that's fantastic. Well, thank you for coming to talk to me.
Thank
It's
you.
been wonderful to have you on the F Word podcast.
Yay!
Thank you for listening to the F Word podcast. To dig a bit deeper around some of the themes we've talked about, do check out the show notes by going to theforgivenessproject.com/FWordPodcast. And from there you can also explore the Forgiveness Project website, which over the years has collected and shared many more stories of how people have transformed the darkest of situations. I also want to invite you to join the F Word Podcast Facebook group, especially if you have more to discuss or share. Again, to find the link, go to theforgivenessproject.com/FWordPodcast. And finally, all these podcasts have grown out of years of trying to shift the narrative of our time away from one of hate and division towards empathy and understanding. So if you've enjoyed this podcast, please do consider donating even just the smallest amount to help us continue our work. All details of how to do this, again, are on the show notes page of our website. But most of all, I hope you'll join me again. Next time on the F Word podcast, I'll be talking to Letlapa Mafaleli, who was once a Liberation Army commander during the time of apartheid in South Africa, responsible for ordering massacres on white people. He'll be talking about the transforming process of being forgiven.